Thank you very much indeed. Welcome, and thank you for the invitation to share a few thoughts together this morning. We've already had some time to meditate, so I won't ask us to spend a few moments in the silence, but I had planned that in. So, living the mystical heart of Theosophy. Obviously, it raises many questions. What is Theosophy? How do we live it? Is there a mystical heart to Theosophy? And what do we mean by mystical? And what is the role of the Theosophical Society, and what are its methods? You'll be pleased to know I won't go into detail in all of these in a short talk. And obviously they're being addressed in the summer school and elsewhere. The answers, of course, ultimately can only be the lived experience of each one of us. We are familiar, of course, with the three stated objects of the TS: to form a brotherhood of humanity, I've shortened them, to study comparative religion, philosophy and science, and to investigate unexplained laws of nature and the powers latent in man. These, of course, cover a very wide spectrum of human endeavour. But as a teacher of mine always emphasized, always ask, how can this be useful and practical for people now? And in this question, when applied to the three objects, perhaps a rather startling conclusion and secret appears. Most people, ourselves included I suspect, probably want to make sense of this world, ourselves and our place in it. And the Theosophical teachings go a very long way in helping us to do this. But to complete the journey, further steps need to be taken. C.W. Leadbeater, in his article reprinted in the Theosophist in August 11, looks at the three objects and makes a simple conclusion. The main result of studying comparative religion is to note that in the essence all religions agree as to fundamentals. In exploring powers latent in man, we discover what a human being is, that the inner unseen aspect of life is much more important than the outer visible shell, and most importantly, we experience for ourselves a oneness, a love beyond words, a peace that passes understanding, in which we know that all life is one, and that life flows through all forms. Only when we experience this is there any real brotherhood. Without this experience, brotherhood in a sense is only a nice idea. Therefore, the ultimate purpose of the TS is to help people experience unity of life. Our late President, Radha Bernier, made the same conclusion in the same edition in the Watchtower, on the Watchtower. She says, "It is very important that we realize that the work of the Society is to establish universal brotherhood, not to proclaim what is Theosophy, having earlier made the point that Theosophy can be difficult to define as a label." She quotes also Mr. Barker in his collection of letters from the Masters. But it is clear, as we read the letters of the adepts, that it is not the name that matters, but the truths and principles which are eternal and unchanging, whatever label is given to them in successive generations. So the greatest truth, I would suggest, from our human point of view, is that we are one in one life, in one immutable law. A fact we have forgotten in our human journey, but can recollect consciously as we learn through life, lives, and spiritual experience. The Mahachohan, in the letters to the Masters of Wisdom, from the Master of Wisdom, wrote, "The fundamental doctrines of all religions will be proved identical in their esoteric meaning. Osiris, Krishna, Buddha, Christ will be shown as different names for one and the same royal highway to final bliss, nirvana." And earlier in the same letter, the TS was chosen as the cornerstone, the foundation of the future religions of humanity. H.P. Blavatsky, in her article, "Is Theosophy a Religion?", which I've taken from Wayne Gatfield's quote in June 15 Theosophist, gives her interpretation of religion. It is perhaps necessary, first of all, to say that the assertion that Theosophy is not a religion by no means excludes the fact that Theosophy is religion itself. A religion in the true and only correct sense is a bond uniting men together, not a particular set of dogmas and beliefs. Religion per se, in its widest meaning, is that which binds not only all humans, but also all beings and all things in the entire universe into one grand whole. This is our theosophical definition of religion. Religion as a word comes from the Latin religere, meaning to bind back, just as yoga derives from the Sanskrit yuj, implies to bind together, to yoke. In this sense, its practice is to unite the individual spirit in man with the greater spirit of God. So this direct experience of union, of love and truth, is called the mystical state. It is beyond words or concepts. It is the essence of all religion. For us as humans, this is possibly the purpose of this phase of evolution on this planet. How do we make sense of this with our limited human minds? The Constitution of Man, of course, is a very helpful theosophical teaching, which, of course, I'm sure you're all very familiar. I will slightly recap. St. Paul, of course, told us we are a spirit, a soul, and a body. Perhaps personality may be a more useful term. Our teachings are that the personality, although it's variously divided up, but is made up largely of the physical body, the etheric energy field, the emotions, and the lower mind. The soul as the higher mind, the intuition, and the lower atmic plane, the Atma Buddhi Manas, of course, in Sanskrit. And the spirit as Atma, and higher still, an outpouring of the one source. There are two main rings or connections, if you like, that between the personality and the soul, and between the soul and the spirit. Usually, as we know, the connections between the personality and the soul are not that clear or very functional. The soul, or reincarnating ego, takes on a new personality at each birth, learns some essential lessons, and relinquishes it again at what we call death, when its usefulness is over. Most of us, of course, live in the personality most of the time, necessarily so, somewhat focused on our personal and even selfish needs. So at this stage of our evolution, we're largely working to connect our soul with our personality, our true self connecting with our separated consciousness. This analogy I'll give is one that's already been used in this summer school, but I find it a very useful one. Of course, the mountain reflected in the lake. The peak of the mountain, Atma, next layer as well as Buddhi, and at the water's edge, higher mind. Reflected in the water, the lower mind. Then, of course, the emotions, and finally the peak, the physical body. Hence, as Dr. Timely in Self-Culture indicated, there are links between the higher and lower mind, which directly reflect into one another. And then as the emotions reflect the love experienced in the unity of Buddhic consciousness. And finally, the spiritual will must be manifested in action on this physical plane. So for a perfect reflection of the soul, the waters of the lower mind need to be still. Be still and know that I am God, as the Psalms indicate. Hence, the traditional path of spiritual development starts with purification, before moving to contemplation, illumination, and finally union. Purification here can mean letting go of the personality level distractions and preoccupations. To build character. To integrate the opposites within us and to offer them to the use of the soul. Without this foundation process of purification and character building, spiritual power and insights would be either useless or even dangerous. So how do we do this? Well, of course, one key practice, as we all know, is to meditate. Again, you're very familiar with this. The first step, of course, is to quieten that monkey mind, which is always darting and chattering about. There are many methods, of course. A simple one, as you will know, is to focus on the breathing, perhaps. So it focuses the mind without giving it distractions to divert to. Another might be to repeat a simple mantra. The effort is to meditate, but any experience of greater peace and so forth only comes when the I stops striving for results. It just relaxes and is receptive to the higher self. Similar experiences occur in quiet moments, of course, especially in nature. In that quietness and lack of effort, as it were, and openness, our consciousness is now open to the soul. We may have a major inspiration or insight. As many scientists will admit is how their discoveries were made. There may be a sense of peace and love and unity as we reach the Buddhic plane. We may simply know something is true or a course of action to take. Many of you will probably have had some of these mystical experiences occasionally. They're actually quite common. But one implication of this understanding is that it is impossible to know spiritual truths directly only through knowledge held in the lower mind. Study of philosophy or theology is ultimately empty unless opening the way to experience and being. Only by silencing and bypassing the lower mind are we in touch with our soul or higher self. The mind is a valuable doorway to the higher, but it needs to be opened. As H.P.B. famously wrote, of course, in The Voice of the Silence, the mind is the slayer of the real. Now I expect many of us here are easily confused by the massive detail of teachings, both in Theosophy and various religions. It can be very confusing, but it's all lower mind stuff. And a lot of us probably not that great at regular meditation. We know we ought to do it, but we don't. The lower mind is usually very successful in avoiding too much direct challenge to its power. So is there anything else that we can do that perhaps bypasses the mind or is in a sense a shortcut? Well, in a way, there are thousands of ways, but I'd like to keep things simple. It's much easier to keep things simple and focus on 3 themes. And once the themes are clear, then the details make sense and fit into place. Obviously, there's a lot of overlap, and in the end, the principles remain the same. It's interesting how synchronicity works with our reading at the meditation earlier. Because the first principle or shortcut that I'm offering is to attempt to live in the eternal now. As you will know, this has been popularized as a word by Eckhart Tolle with a book of the same name. It's taken directly from Buddhist teachings. If you've not already studied it, in brief, he makes the observation that we, through our minds, tend to live in the past or the future. But very seldom is our mind actually present. We constantly recall pleasant or unpleasant experiences and relationships and often have regrets and guilt about our actions. There's always plenty to find along those lines as evidence. And yet these are all in the past. And all we can do with them is to change how we view them in the now. The point of change is always now. Similarly, we have hopes and expectations for the future and coming events. But these are only that, hopes and expectations, dreams of the future. They are not yet a reality. So when we focus our intention and attention entirely on the moment, mindfully, fully aware, we've bypassed the I that notices and labels. For those noticing and labels are only memories, and even if that was only a second ago, it is still only a memory. So in that fully mindfulness attention to now, we're not living in the past and we're not living in the future. We're living in the only reality that ever exists, which is now. As Tim Boyd mentioned yesterday, when, for instance, we see sun glittering on the fresh green leaves of a tree, we are in an experience. But the moment we say, "That's beautiful," the experience vanishes and all you remain with is a labelled memory. Now, therefore, is no longer subject to time or distortions of memory. It is clear perception or truth of this moment. The connection between the personality, subject to identity and time, and the soul, and even the spirit, which are both beyond time, is now made. Heaven and earth are in unison. Higher is now fully reflected in the lower. In the eternal now, we are one. Being, I am. I offer some quotes from his other book, Stillness Speaks, which I think are helpful. Pay attention to the gap between two thoughts, the brief, silent space between words in a conversation, between the notes of a piano or flute, or the gap between the in-breath and the out-breath. When you pay attention to those gaps, awareness of something becomes just awareness. The formless dimension of pure consciousness arises from within you and replaces identification with form. You are that awareness disguised as a person. A simple and radical spiritual practice is to accept whatever arises in the now, within and without. Most people confuse the now with what happens in the now. But that is not what it is. The now is deeper than what happens in it. It is the space in which it happens. So to repeat, to summarize, in stillness, focused in the eternal now, fully accepting what is being, I am. So that is one shortcut. We don't need any more teachings if we do that. There's another simple shortcut: love. There's a lot of misunderstanding about this word, but one definition that I found helpful from Dr. Scott Peck in The Road Less Travelled is the following: the willingness to extend oneself for the spiritual good of another. Love, the willingness to extend oneself for the spiritual good of another. Note firstly then the willingness. It's not foremost a feeling, but an act of will. A mother will still get up to her child in the night, even though her feelings may not be particularly loving at that moment. But up you will get. Secondly, love is an extension of ourselves, an effort, a stretching beyond our personal boundaries. And thirdly, it is for the spiritual good of another, not what their personality may want. Now, of course, we often associate love with emotion, and we know that in our current phase of evolution, emotions are pretty difficult things to cope with and to manage at the level of the personality. And again, the simplification may help to make sense of the confusion that often ensues. You can see that most emotions could be divided into either love or fear. What we call the negative emotions, such as anger or jealousy and many others that you can think of, when you trace them back, are usually expressions of some fear. Fear of loss, especially of self-esteem and identity. One of our most underlying fears is not being good enough. And we'll always have plenty of evidence for that anyway, so it's easily generated. So you could say that we are either demanding love me because I don't love myself, I'm not good enough, or we're able to give love. So perhaps there is only love, and you're either taking it or giving it. Depends on the direction of flow. And so this simplification can be used to notice whenever we're feeling anything. Is it love or is it fear? Where's the fear coming from? And then trace it to its origin. But most importantly, we have a choice which direction that flow will go. We might not think so, but we do. We can choose love, or we can choose to remain in the fear. As Christ said, though, perfect love casteth out fear. So it's perhaps a little helpful. I would also add that in every interaction with another person, we can perhaps see it as an opportunity to give encouragement or love, and to learn something ourselves too. In this way, we're far less likely to be caught up in our personal needs, although there is a time for them to have attention too. So in any interaction, we have to be alertly aware of what is happening. And I would suggest that the first thing and the simplest thing we can do, for which there's lots of evidence that it helps you and others, is to smile. Sounds such a small thing to do. It cheers you up, it affirms the other person, draws out their love and humanity as well. Very simple thing to do. And we know, of course, that nothing, plant, animal or human, thrives or can even live without love. Love then is the will to grow, to evolve. It can be seen as the core of each person, however hidden it may appear to be. It is trying to express itself from the soul through the personality. When we see people in this way, then we can try and help them to express love better. That is the job of us all. Love, of course, is the most important of all the qualifications for the path of discipleship. As the Master says, and at the feet of the Master, for if it is strong enough in a man, it forces him to acquire all the rest, and all the rest without it would never be sufficient. It is indeed the will to be one in God, not in order that you may escape from weariness and suffering, but in order that because of your deep love for him, you may act with him as he does. Because he is love, you, if you would become one with him, must be filled with perfect unselfishness and love also. In the Christian scriptures, John, beloved, let us love one another, for love is of God. And every one that loveth is born of God and knoweth God. He that loveth not, knoweth not God, for God is love. Christ and Krishna, of course, both taught, are embodiments of love, incarnations in the flesh, as it were. Buddha, of course, called it compassion and wisdom. One of our teachings, of course, is that the soul can be understood as the Christ or the Buddhic principle within each person. It is therefore the Son of the Father, of the Spirit, of will, of Atma. So indeed no human being can reach the Spirit except through love, through the Son, as it were. Therefore Christ's statement, I am the way, the truth and the life, no one comes to the Father but by me, is entirely true in a universal way for all humanity. I would also suggest that love is the same at all levels of creation, the will to good, to wholeness, from the source right through our daily lives, carries us home. Christ again said in St. John, I am in the Father, and the Father in me. I and my Father are one. As the Father hath loved me, so have I loved you, and this is my commandment, that ye love one another as I have loved you. This could be likened to the soul now absorbed into the Spirit. I and my Father are one, symbolized in the Christian tradition as the ascension into heaven. In the Buddhist tradition, the dewdrop slipping into the shining sea. Ricebrook, the great mystic, spoke thus: when love has carried us above and beyond all things, above the light, into the divine dark, there we are wrought and transformed by the eternal Word, who is the image of the Father. And as the air is penetrated by the sun, thus we receive, in idleness of spirit, the incomprehensible light, enfolding us and penetrating us. We behold that which we are, and we are that which we behold, because our thought, life, and being are uplifted in simplicity and made one with the truth, which is God. And elsewhere he again describes that experience. Everything that I have, he takes. All that he is, he gives. This is the fuller mystical experience, one that is so much rarer in this world at the moment, yet probably the goal of evolution at the moment. And finally, another shortcut, the third one. And that is the use of ritual. The understanding of this method has often been rather lost lately. It is the experience of many of us that it is an amazingly effective and safe way of raising consciousness when worked properly. It can allow a much deeper contact and cooperation than most of us could achieve in our limited meditations. Contact with the angelic kingdom, with the masters, with cosmic forces, and all that that wonderful opportunity implies. HPB and the masters appear to write against ceremonies at times, but when you read carefully, they are against the idea that ritual itself is sufficient, and against the idea that the control was often exerted by the priests of whatever religion over the population, particularly when combined with a very distorted and materialized philosophy. But ritual only works when properly authorized from the inner worlds, and with the careful intent and understanding of those involved, for love and thought animate the outer process. Otherwise, indeed, they are only empty pageantry. Of course, they are not necessary ultimately, but as C.W. Leadbeater remarked, they're very useful while we still need to grow spiritually. Of course, our teachings in the TS are that each person is free to find the way that is useful for them. We must choose the way that is right for each one of us. This may include practicing a formal religion, often with a renewed understanding born of the deeper insights learnt. A lot of formal religions on the surface are incredibly thin at the moment, I would suggest. As we said at the beginning, the ancient wisdom, the essence of religion, was previously only taught to the few who were qualified and prepared to receive it. At that time, often the methods of that transmission of knowledge included ritual work, and as I'm sure you're aware, were known as the mysteries. The mysteries in ancient Egypt, still pictured for us as the Book of the Dead. The mysteries in Greece, especially at Eleusis, older still in Crete, focused around Knossos, and throughout the ancient world. The Mithraic mysteries competed with the newly opened Christian mysteries. And in later times, the streams of influence have flowed through Freemasonry, the Templars, Rosicrucians, other esoteric orders. The teachings surfaced as the Renaissance and the Age of Enlightenment in Western Europe, ushering in the scientific age. So what are some of the advantages of sacramental mysticism? Not going to list them all, but there are many. It's often said they're more suited to the Western mind. Necessarily, it's usually group work. So immediately there is a sharing, there's a mutual encouragement and support, a harmonizing, working together. A coordinated group also produces much greater spiritual energy than an individual usually can. We are reminded that Christ said, "Where 2 or 3 are gathered together in my name, there I am in the midst." At times, this is so tangible that members will regularly travel hundreds of miles in a day, even round the world, to attend meetings. I cannot think of many lectures that would call forth such commitment. The energy is understood not to be primarily for our personal use, but always sent out for the upliftment of the consciousness of the world, to aid its healing and evolution. It is a great act of service. The method is one of action, as I said, which some find more effective. It anchors again the highest will, Atma, through to the physical plane, the lowest. C.W. Leadbeater indicated that the current Aquarian age will be that of the 7th ray, taking over from the 6th ray of devotion gradually. The negative aspect of the 6th ray, of course, is fanaticism, the dying embers of which we currently see in the world. So the 7th ray is described as bringing the spiritual life in direct relation to the physical plane, with increasing high angelic cooperation, especially in ritual work. The master most in charge of the 7th ray is said outwardly to be known as the Comte de Saint-Germain. The archangel most associated, that of Saint Raphael, especially concerned with healing or making whole the spirit and the physical altogether. The colour most associated is purple and the stone amethyst. So why is ritual so effective? Well, it combines many methods that essentially bypass the lower mind, but also harnesses the mind in appropriate service to the higher ideal. It uses symbolism, colour, music, beauty, scent, prayer, movement, creative words of power, all in a calculated and scientific way to produce the desired effect. And symbolism, of course, is not just an image chosen to represent something, but transmits something of the truth that stands behind it. As an exercise, you might like to notice the difference in feel between a circle and a square when you observe it for a while. When you contemplate them, they feel different. They are symbols, but the truths that they transmit are different. The ritual attempts to link heaven and earth by mirroring the divine principles at every level. And the best mirror and instrument, of course, is the human being, made in the image of God. These are summarized in the ancient adages from the mysteries that are so familiar: as above, so below, and man, know thyself. In this process there is simple teaching of the divine nature expressed through the ritual, how the world is inwardly constructed and related to each part. But we also experience something of the reality of these qualities ourselves as we become part of the ritual. In a safe and graded way, our understanding and consciousness, or kundalini, is raised until it reaches the crown and enlightenment, if we will inwardly cooperate. Therefore, the spiritual life is a gradual process and often likened to a ladder, as we've discussed elsewhere in this summer school. In theosophical terms, we have the various steps of preparation, of probation, then acceptance as a pupil or chela. And much later, We hope to reach that of the fourth initiation, or Arhat and Adept and beyond, Chowan and Buddha. In the Christian tradition, these steps or initiations are described as the birth of the Christ consciousness, which we call Christmas, followed by baptism, then transfiguration. The fourth initiation is suggested to be the crucifixion and resurrection. In Buddhism and Hinduism, called the Great Renunciation. Renunciation of the power and illusion of the personality, dying on the cross of matter, reverting back to the Christian idea. So that the personality dies, and what resurrects is the soul. And finally, the soul reaching to the spirit, symbolized as ascension into heaven. In Freemasonry, one has a series of degrees, the third representing renunciation. Hence, for us living in the personality, death and resurrection are the key themes in all the ancient mysteries. For it is the great key to understanding the meaning of life and its relation to form. I'd like very briefly, I know I'm running out of time, but to give some illustrations of the symbology, to give some examples, if you'll forgive me. In the Christian Eucharist, instituted by the Christian Master 2,000 years ago, we can see the entire process of evolution. And because time only exists up to a certain level, actually take part in it. Using some of the symbology we have, therefore, usually one light burning above the altar, from which are lit 6 candles, traditionally, one either side of the cross. The cross, as you will know from the proem of the Secret Doctrine, is an ancient symbol of the creation of the universe. First, a circle representing cosmic space, then a horizontal line, the first division into duality, spirit and pre-matter, followed by the descending vertical line, the spirit descending into matter, giving it form, and later life. The limitation of Godhead into matter, described as He died for us. The cross is a symbol of sacrifice and therefore love, a symbol of the second ray, of which Christ is said to be the head, with the Master KH as his deputy. These 6 candles with the cross can represent the 7 rays, the 7 spirits before the throne, as in Revelations. And through these a link can be made with the rays, the masters and the angels of the rays, especially using incense and lighting the candles, with the intent that accompanies the outer action. During the service, there's a gradual raising of consciousness from the physical to the emotional to the mental planes. And then upon the altar stone, usually a square of marble representing earth, we offer the fruits of earth, a chalice filled with wine and a white disc of bread, and most importantly, ourselves, as a sacrifice. Sacrare means to make holy, a sacrifice to the higher. The chalice can represent the purified personality, emptied of self. The cup is only useful when empty. It's also the causal body, emptied to receive the soul, the wine, and above it at one point the disc, the host representing the spirit or Atma. At the words of consecration, the inner energies change, that the life and love of the Christ, as they descend into the wine and bread, now become bodies, or vehicles of the divine. At the communion, the words that are usually said as the body and blood of our Lord Christ keep thee unto life eternal, signifying that consciousness is now raised to the Christ beyond time and space. Life eternal is not lots of time, it's beyond time, one with Him, the principle of love. The apparent outer is merged with the inner to become one in communion. This is the purpose of evolution. And then at the end of the Manvantara, or cycle of creation, we extinguish the candles, leaving the one, the presence. Divine energy is sent out into the world to uplift it. truly a great service in which we can all take part. I stumbled across this picture actually, which not all of you can see at a distance, but it's off the internet. It's the glowing consecrated host on an altar in a Romanian Orthodox church. Energies change. Almost the same sacrament using bread and wine were used in the Mithraic mysteries, which descended from Zoroastrianism. In ancient Egypt, we have the myth of Osiris, murdered by his brother, scattered around the world, his body scattered around the world, the pieces collected by his wife Isis, and from their uniting a son Horus is born. The one becomes the many when it is in material creation, the body broken, but on earth the mother unites them and gives them birth to divine consciousness, the Son, the Christ, or Horus within. We note that Horus is eagle-headed, as the eagle flies high above the earth, freed from its limitations. The same symbolism is that of the caduceus, or staff of Hermes, or Mercury, the two snakes winding round a central pole, winged at the head, representing the rise of Kundalini up the spine, and on reaching enlightenment, the initiate is free from earth. The symbolism in Freemasonry can very briefly be that the lodge can represent the earth, the universe, and man, with a black and white carpet of duality and manifestation. The officers embody aspects of the constitution of man, such as the mind and the emotions, the etheric and the body, and the wisdom, strength and beauty of the divine Trinity manifested and reflected in humanity and in the world. And through the degrees, the initiate learns about life, how to live it, its purpose, the relationship of life to form, the true self, a core of love and within, and higher still to the one. But most importantly, the candidate increasingly experiences some of these dimensions. These insights are not universally held by representatives of Christianity or Freemasonry, of course. They were restated and to some extent rediscovered, especially by C.W. Leadbeater, J.R. Wedgwood and Annie Besant, and substantiated by many others. They desire to bring the ancient mysteries to new life in the old forms, which still functioned if it was known how to use them. Somewhat unexpectedly, they found themselves forming what became the liberal Catholic Church, teaching theosophical philosophy, including reincarnation and the divine within each person with freedom of thought. These teachings are there, of course, in early Christianity, but lost very rapidly even after the foundation, over the centuries even more so. Interestingly, some of Leadbeater's statements and insights have since been confirmed by the later finding of the ancient Nag Hammadi scriptures. Many of you will know that Annie Besant essentially founded co-Freemasonry, which equally admits men and women to the craft, in the UK, with its particular emphasis on spiritual purpose in Freemasonry, which has since spread throughout the world. Very many theosophists, including most presidents of the TS, were and still are working in these sort of organizations or their derivatives. Not all the derivatives or even the beginnings have necessarily maintained the fullness of their heritage, unfortunately. There was a time when Annie Besant did announce, perhaps slightly controversially, there are three main ways to the masters: the Theosophical Society, the Liberal Catholic Church, and co-Freemasonry. There are, of course, many others, Martinism, perhaps, for children, the International Order Round Table, and some others of which we may not speak. To conclude, and returning to the Theosophical Society itself, in view of the insight that we need to experience something of our true self and of the divine and that this best occurs when we're not trapped in our lower mind. The question arises for me, how are we conducting our meetings? Yes, we do need to teach clearly and in a modern presentation the fundamentals of Theosophy, the same principles of the ancient wisdom throughout the ages and under other names. For these form the building blocks of understanding and transmission to the next generation. But what do we do to open the possibility of experience? I have visited a number of lodges where the atmosphere is decidedly mentally focused, even cold and fragmented. Other members I've spoken to have had similar experiences. It's not a pleasant one, actually. We could suggest a period of silence, even just a minute or two before and after the main talk. For in the silence we already open the possibility of bypassing the lower mind and contacting the spirit, the higher self. Better still, a short meditation at the end, perhaps working through the bodies, focusing on light and love within and without, in silence, and then spreading that light and love to the world and returning to this moment in time and space, through the bodies, relaxed and in peace. Obviously there are many other ideas of meditation we could work with. We could add some invocation. Some lodges do already, such as HPB, the Golden Stairs, and of course the very beautiful quote from the Gita, from the unreal lead us to the real, from darkness lead us to light, from death lead us to immortality. And one could end perhaps with Annie Besant's chain of union, the oneness of all life reaffirmed. Many others could be suggested or composed, but they immediately contact the dimension to which they are linked. Some of us have used these at TS meetings successfully for decades. In case one is a little cautious in terms of the public, I would add that I do run a local group at the hospital, as well as study days in the NHS for the entire trust on these sort of topics, and always use brief silence and meditation during those days, as it were. Not just well received, but often stated to be the main reason for coming. Mindfulness, of course, is very fashionable currently. Groups springing up everywhere, often spending about 3/4 an hour just in the silence. It is a treatment recommended by NICE, the government body recommending NHS treatments for anxiety, depression and other conditions. We're very much in the fashion if we do this. So I hope some of these ideas are useful. Each of us will find the way that is useful to us in our stage of our journey. And as we live the mystical heart of Theosophy, we shall become one in the real brotherhood of unity, the centre, the void yet fullness from which all creation springs. Thank you for listening.